Dontaesboxingnation, what's going on, guys? So Lara confronts Canelo Alvarez during his post-fight conference after the Angulo fight, of course. Before I get into what was exactly said, I want to say it's funny because this whole situation right here, the confrontation at the post-fight conference, it really reminds me of Aaron Pryor when he did this to Sugar Ray Leonard. We all know that Sugar Ray Leonard, he avoided Aaron Pryor and never gave him a shot at the title or a shot at him, period. And the conversation, or at least the exchange that transpired between Aaron Pryor and Sugar Ray Leonard were almost identical to the type of conversation that Lara briefly had with Canelo on the stage this past weekend. Lara just basically got on stage and he said, "I want to let everyone know that I want this fight. Let's get it on." Canelo, he simply responded by just saying that no one wants to watch the fight and tried to pretty much blow Lara off. Now, what made me chuckle a little bit is when Lara first hopped on the stage and Canelo turns around to see that Lara is behind him and the look that Canelo had on his face. He made a quick little face expression like, "Oh boy, here we go. This damn Lara problem is not going to go away." Now, Lara, he actually said that before the fight, Lara went into the locker rooms, to Canelo's locker room, and basically wished Canelo luck. And he said to him, "Let's get it on, Canelo." And Lara said that Canelo, in response to that, he said, "I'm ready." And then, of course, after the fight, when Lara confronts him at his post-fight conference, now all of a sudden Canelo is saying, "Well, nobody wants to watch the fight." There's so many things we could talk about when it comes to how ridiculous that sounds for Canelo to say no one wants to watch that fight. I don't even know where to start. Let me start by just saying this. First of all, if Canelo was really concerned about who wants to watch certain opponents that he chooses, we would have never seen this Angulo fight. We would have never seen this Angulo fight. Like I said, Canelo, I've made numerous videos. You guys go back and watch my previous videos. And, what's so crazy about this is I was giving Canelo the benefit of the doubt, a couple months before he announced that he was going to fight Angulo, when Golden Boy and Canelo Alvarez announced that he was going to be fighting 3 times in 2014, and all 3 of the fights were pay-per-view fights. I automatically assumed that this meant that Canelo was going to be stepping up. So I was giving Canelo Alvarez props before he even announced his first fight for the new year, because I automatically assumed that he was going to be fighting someone, some top-notch opponent if it was going to be pay-per-view caliber. So I came up with a list in one of my videos of very good potential opponents and champions that Canelo Alvarez could face, because there were just so many opponents that he could face, all the way from 160 fighters that'll move down to 154 to all the top-notch 154-pound fighters, right? Now, I'm thinking in my head that this is win-win for the fans. This is win-win for Canelo, because no matter who he chooses, it's going to be a respectable opponent, right? At least that's what I was thinking. So like I said, this list I had, some fighters were obviously much better than others. And some fighters, they weren't like world beaters, but they were a very good challenge for Canelo Alvarez, to say the least. They were not Angulo type of opponents. On that list I had Demetrius Andrade. I had Erislandy Lara. I had a possible rematch with Austin Trout, since that fight was extremely close, right? I had Vanes Martirosyan, even though he came off of a loss against Demetrius Andrade, but yet and still, Vanes Martirosyan is a very young opponent that has a lot of skills, amateur pedigree, etc., right? I had Carlos Molina on the list. I even had Victor Ortiz on the list, at the bottom of the list, but yet that would have still been a test for Canelo Alvarez. Okay, I had Sergio Martinez on the list. Miguel Cotto, of course. We already know that Canelo wants Miguel Cotto no matter how many times Miguel Cotto loses. In fact, we'll talk about that on another video. But, so these are the type of fighters that I had on this list. I figured no matter who he chooses, this will be a test and this will be a step up in the right direction for Canelo Alvarez. But Canelo Alvarez, he ended up doing something that surprised me and a whole lot of boxing fans, is he decided to fight a guy who wasn't even on that list, right? He found an opponent that was even safer than a Carlos Molina, even safer than a Victor Ortiz, right? He picked a guy who just came off of a loss, who just quit in that fight and had a fractured eye socket in the fight, okay? A guy who is slower than a snail, foot movement, no hand speed, and has no defense, zero defense at all. I mean, if this dude, Alfredo Angulo, he made Brandon Rios look like Floyd Mayweather, okay? Defense, reflexes, speed. I think you guys understand the point I'm making. And then, to make things even more comical, Canelo Alvarez, in All Access, when he was fighting against Floyd Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez, he had the nerve to say, well, Floyd Mayweather, he gets to pick his opponents. He has that type of advantage that other fighters don't have. He gets to pick his opponents, right? But yet, what does that say about you then, Canelo? Because he picked you. What does that say about you, Canelo, if that's the case? But then at the same time, to go even further, look at who Canelo just picked when he picked Angulo. This was a pick by Canelo. This wasn't a pick by Golden Boy. Golden Boy didn't call up Canelo and say, you're fighting Angulo, and that's all that's to it. You can cry if you want, but that's your next opponent. No. This was Team Canelo's decision. If you go back and you read previous interviews with Richard Schaefer, there are many times that you'll hear Richard Schaefer say, we're waiting on Team Canelo, or we're waiting on Canelo to make a decision. Okay? So to sit over here and start to talk like a casual fan and say, Floyd gets to pick his opponents, you're doing the exact same thing. In fact, every fighter does that exact same thing. Every fighter chooses their opponent. Okay? Every fighter chooses their opponent. I mean, why do you think Johnny Gonzalez is not fighting Gary Russell, the #1 challenger in the division? Why do you think that is? It's because Johnny Gonzalez, he is choosing not to fight Gary Russell, right? Because Golden Boy, they want to make the fight. Gary Russell, a fight with Gary Russell is going to be on HBO, or on Showtime. So it's going to be on a big network. But yet Johnny Gonzalez, he doesn't want that fight. HBO wanted to make the Juan Marquez versus Provodnikov fight. The WBO president, once again, flew out to Mexico to meet up with Juan Marquez face-to-face, sit down with him, and urge him to take this fight. Provodnikov was just involved in Fight of the Year against Tim Bradley. Juan Marquez is already known to be somewhat of a warrior in the ring. This is the type of fight that HBO craves for. Let's do it. Let's make the fight, Marquez. What does Marquez do? Marquez, he elects and he chooses not to fight Provodnikov. So who is Marquez going to fight instead? Marquez is going to, of course, fight the guy that Provodnikov just beat, right? So the point that I'm making is everyone chooses their opponents. The question is, are you going to choose a winner or are you going to choose a loser? Canelo chose a loser in Angulo, okay? There were many fighters that were coming off of wins. There were many fighters who had championship belts that Canelo could have chose to fight, but this is the guy that he chose to fight. Nobody wants to watch the fight. That is just an absurd, ridiculous excuse. You know what? Let's just go off of that for a second, all right? Because no matter what excuse Canelo makes, he's going to run into a contradiction. Let's just go with that excuse. Let's say Canelo didn't take the fight because no one wanted to see it. So what Canelo Alvarez is suggesting is he only fights the type of opponents that the fans really want to see him fight, right? Now, forget about the fact that Canelo Alvarez, he was just fighting against a Josito Lopez that no one had ever heard of. You know, he was just fighting Matthew Hatton, Ricky Hatton's brother, and a couple other tomato cans that we had never heard of, while Erislandy Lara was calling him out. Erislandy Lara at one point was the biggest name out of all of the fighters that Canelo Alvarez had previously faced. Okay? You cannot sit here and tell me that Matthew Hatton was a bigger name and everyone wanted to see him fight Matthew Hatton, but no one wanted to see him fight Erislandy Lara a year ago or 2 years ago. All right? But like I said, once again, let's just go with that theory. Let's go with the logic that he wants to fight only opponents that the fans want to see him fight. Right? So if that's the case, are you telling me right now, Canelo, that if Keith Thurman, if Golden Boy told you, we want you to fight Keith Thurman in your next fight, he's going to take that fight? You think Canelo going to take that fight against Keith Thurman? Even though Keith Thurman is smaller than he is, but Keith Thurman already said he'll move up to 154 and fight Canelo. Right? So you think Canelo's going to take that fight with Keith Thurman? I mean, you just said that you only want to fight fighters that everyone wants to see you fight, right? We know everyone wants to see that fight. Or what about Golovkin? Gennady Golovkin. We know everyone wants to see that fight. So are you saying you're going to fight Golovkin? Huh, Canelo? You see, no matter how you try to rationalize it, it does not work. You are still going to look like a hypocrite at the end of the day. So why don't you just do yourself a favor and either take the fight or just be honest and say, look, man, this guy is too dangerous of an opponent right now. Maybe later down in the future I'll fight him, but right now he's just too dangerous of an opponent. You know, he's a good fighter. I give him credit. And right now we're not looking for opponents that dangerous right now. I mean, realistically, people will respect you more if you just be honest instead of saying silly shit that doesn't make sense. Like, no one wants to see the fight. Come on, man. Everyone wants to see the fight. The only people who don't want to see that fight are people who are afraid that Canelo may lose to Erislandy Lara. In other words, people who want to protect Canelo, people who want him to continue to win, they want him to continue to look like the new star. You know, if I was Lara and I was on that stage, I would have said to Canelo, so you saying that you don't want to be the best, Canelo? You saying that you're only going to fight opponents that your fans want you to fight? Is that what you're saying, Canelo? What if your fans, what if they only want to see you fight bums and tomato cans for the rest of your career so that you could remain looking like you are unbeaten outside of the loss to Floyd Mayweather, of course, right? Is that what you want, Canelo? That's what I would have said if I was Lara. Nobody wants to see the fight. Let me tell you how bad people wanted to see the Angulo fight. Because I was there at the weigh-in, which I'm going to show you guys a little bit of the inside footage of the arena on another video. But anyway, let me make this clear. Usually when you go to a weigh-in, especially at the MGM for a big fight, they normally only open up 1/4 of the arena to the public, okay, when you go to the weigh-in. But when Floyd Mayweather fought against Canelo Alvarez, because the anticipation was so high, they opened up the entire arena to the public. And do you know every single seat was filled that night or the day of the weigh-in? But when Canelo fought against Angulo, I went to that weigh-in. Once again, they only had the quarter of the arena that was open to the public. And do you know that there were hundreds of empty seats in there? There were a gang of empty seats. So Canelo Alvarez, he couldn't even fill up a quarter of the arena fighting against Angulo. How do you think the numbers would look if Angulo was fighting against Erislandy Lara? We already know that the numbers, the ratings, and everything else will be much higher. And just real quick, looking at this picture, doesn't it look like Canelo, he just got in trouble and he's talking to his dad right now? And his dad is highly pissed off because he done did something he knew he wasn't supposed to do.